Hello, welcome back to Teen Story Share. This week we're continuing Samurai Rising, The Epic Life of Minamoto Yoshitsune by Pamela S. Turner, illustrated by Gareth Hinds. And last week we read chapter 1 of this story, so I'll link that down below if you missed it. And just as a reminder, it's actually not just a story, this is real life. And this famous samurai lived in the 1100s, and this is his story. Chapter 2, Headless Ghosts. Kurama, 1160 to 1174. We know very little about Yoshitsune's early life. According to some accounts, Tokiwa became Kiyomori's mistress. As a small child, Yoshitsune may have spent his first years in Kiyomori's household on the outskirts of Kyoto. In those days, Kyoto was the center of the Japanese universe. The emperor lived there, hidden like a nesting doll inside his palace, which was surrounded by a compound, which was surrounded by a city laid out as tidily as a checkerboard. Such a special place required spiritual protection. As everyone knew, bad luck and ill spirits often arrived from a northerly direction, so Kyoto had been built on a plain sheltered on the north, east, and west by mountains. Tile-roofed temples sprouted like mushroom caps from the forested slopes, providing an extra line of defense against evil demons, malicious sprites, and vengeful spirits. And a good thing, too. The recent Minamoto-Taira conflict had sharply increased the number of bad-tempered ghosts wafting around. At about age 7, Yoshitsune was taken away from Tokiwa and delivered to one of the holy places north of Kyoto. Did no one notice that Kurama Temple was dedicated to Bishamon 10, the Buddhist patron god of warriors? At Kurama, there were no soft laps and mother's kisses. Yoshitsune entered a world of hard floorboards and silent statues. The temple offered no chairs, no beds, and no bedding. Monks and monks in training slept on thin straw mats, and instead of blankets, covered themselves with extra clothing made of rough hemp. No roaring fireplaces warmed the wooden buildings, not even in the frozen core of winter. The monks of Kurama expected young apprentices to memorize the names and proper worship of Japan's divine beings. This wasn't easy. Buddhism had moved into Japan 6 centuries earlier, but never evicted the gods of the native Shinto religion, so the invisible realm was rather crowded. There were cosmic Buddhas and Buddhist gods of salvation. Every major family had its own patron god. Every hamlet had its local Buddha. And countless Shinto nature spirits inhabited oddly shaped rocks and stately trees. Monks kept these divine beings happy by reciting and copying sacred Buddhist scriptures. As part of their religious training, boys like Yoshitsune spent countless leg-numbing hours kneeling over sheets and scrolls of rice paper, learning to read and write scriptures in Japanese, the everyday language, and Chinese, the language of scholars and administrators. Besides pleasing the gods, Buddha's sacred words also worked magic on the souls of the dead. Buddhists believed that a person's soul would be reborn into a new body, and that the balance of good deeds and bad deeds in one's prior life determined one's fate in this one. However, while awaiting its next reincarnation, a soul sometimes lingered in the world as a ghost. Unhappy ghosts caused illness and accidents, so it was very important to keep departed souls placid until their next rebirth. As a monk, Yoshitsune would be expected to copy and recite scriptures to soothe the restless spirits of his dead relatives. The restlessness of the boy's own spirit was apparently overlooked. No boy with Yoshitsune's energy could be contained within incense-scented walls. Kurama's doors opened to a wilderness of tumbling waterfalls and lofty cedars, pink-faced monkeys and flying squirrels. Short-winged hawks chased smaller birds through the forest, crashing recklessly through bushes in fierce pursuit, like samurai on the wing. People later told stories about Yoshitsune's boyhood and how he sought out the secrecy of the forest. They said he pretended that bushes were Taira and slashed the enemy shrubbery with switches and sticks, saving his most ferocious attacks for a tree he named Kiyomori. Of course, Yoshitsune couldn't possibly remember what had happened in Kyoto. He was just a baby during that terrible time. Yet, even hidden away at Kurama, he learned something of his family history. Stories travel. Even holy men gossip. In Yoshitsune's time, the names Minamoto and Taira were famous throughout Japan. Yoshitsune was probably proud to discover that he was the 10th generation descendant of an emperor. His enemy, Taira Kiyomori, also boasted an imperial bloodline. The ancestors of both Yoshitsune and Kiyomori had become samurai because of the problem of excess princes. Japanese emperors often married several wives and produced more sons than necessary to carry on the imperial line. Unfortunately, within the strict ranking system of the imperial court, only a limited number of high-ranking titles, which came with vast estates and equally vast riches, were available to these princes. Sons born to the emperor's lower-ranking wives had little chance of advancement, so they sometimes went looking for opportunities outside Kyoto. The founders of the Taira and Minamoto families were spare heirs who moved to the provinces to seek their fortunes. The Minamoto family became a power in the east. The Taira dominated the west. As provincial lords, these princes and their descendants took care of the messy parts of governing. They caught criminals, killed barbarians, and forced peasants to pay taxes. Sometimes they owned their own land, but mostly they acted as estate managers for higher-ranking aristocrats living in Kyoto. The aristocrats in the capital didn't want to get their robes muddy. They preferred to concentrate on poetry, fashion, and illicit love affairs with one another's wives and daughters. In the provinces, the Minamoto and Taira lords commanded great respect because of their imperial blood. Well-off local men became their retainers. The Minamoto and Taira also kept in close contact with the capital. However, the snobbish aristocrats of Kyoto never let the samurai forget who was who in the social scheme. If transported into a modern high school, the Kyoto nobility would consider themselves the cool kids. They thought of the samurai as dumb jocks. As the years passed, the Minamoto and Taira grew in wealth and military muscle. The two great samurai families served the imperial family, it is said, like two wings of a bird. They put down rebellions, kept the roads and sea routes safe from bandits and pirates, and made sure that taxes flowed into Kyoto. Yet, as the power of the samurai lords increased, so did their inferiority complex, and there is nothing in the world as dangerous as a man bristling with weapons and insecurities. When Yoshitsune's father kidnapped the retired emperor and burned his palace, he thought his actions would make the Minamoto stronger and more secure. His bungling produced the opposite result. Before the failed rebellion, the retired emperor had kept the growing influence of the samurai in check by playing one samurai family against the other, Minamoto versus Taira. But now the Minamoto were weak and leaderless, unable to serve as a counterweight to the power of the Taira family. Taira Kiyomori had the upper hand. He forced the retired emperor to appoint him chancellor, the highest rank ever awarded to a samurai. Titles, land, and wealth flowed to Kiyomori, his family, and his friends. Team Taira was on top. This bitter news surely reached Kurama Temple. It's easy to imagine young Yoshitsune, angry and frustrated, slashing his way through forests of phantom Taira. But how could a temple boy redeem the Minamoto family's honor? Yoshitsune didn't have money, or allies, or anyone who could teach him essential samurai skills: archery, horsemanship, and swordsmanship. He wasn't big or strong or good-looking. The only description we have of him is a small, pale youth with crooked teeth and bulging eyes. Maybe it's a blessing that the mirrors of the time were made of polished metal and not very reflective. Yoshitsune couldn't hope for rescue. Most of his surviving uncles and cousins lived far to the east, under the beady gaze of Taira overlords. He did have at least one surviving half-brother, the boy who had been 14 at the time of the disaster in Kyoto. But his half-brother, now a grown man, was held captive by one of Kiyomori's retainers. Yoshitsune's two full brothers, the other sons of Tokiwa, had already become monks. It was the path Kiyomori had chosen for Yoshitsune as well. Yoshitsune's only assets were brains, ambition, and a dream, but childhood dreams can change history. His 15th birthday loomed. At this age, Japanese boys were considered men. Soon Yoshitsune would be expected to shave his head and take his final religious vows. A safe life of scripture reading and ghost soothing unscrolled before him. That spring, a wealthy gold merchant stopped at Kurama on his way north. The gold merchant turned out to be a friend of the Minamoto and was willing to help. Yoshitsune seized his chance to change his fate. Disguised as the merchant's servant, he slipped away. Surely Yoshitsune understood the risk. His escape was no boyish game. It was a rebellion against Taira Kiyomori, the most powerful samurai in Japan. If Yoshitsune were captured, his severed head would probably dangle from the sandalwood tree beside the Kyoto prison gate, just like his father's. 8 centuries separate us from Yoshitsune, yet it is easy to imagine the hope and fear in his heart as he launched himself into a dangerous world. All right, that's all we're going to be reading of this book, because next week we have our special all ages December read aloud thing coming up. But if you want to find out the rest of what happens to Minamoto Yoshitsune, this book will be available for checkout at the library. Thanks for joining me and have a great weekend. See you next time. Bye.